My name is Danielle Moore. I'm 36 years old and a commercial attorney in New York overseeing national contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But if you asked my parents, I'd still just be the stubborn daughter who always does things her own way. I was born into an upper-class family on Manhattan's Upper East Side. My father, Franklin Moore, is the founder of Moore and Kingsley Realty, a real estate empire spread across the East Coast. My mother, Linda, is the kind of woman who never appears without a pearl necklace, moves like a stage actress, and knows exactly how to make each social event echo through elite circles. We lived in a three-story classic townhouse with walnut-paneled walls and crystal chandeliers, once featured in a design magazine when I was 8. My parents had two children, me and my brother Brandon, who's 4 years older. From an early age, everyone said I was the smarter one. I learned to read at 3, placed second in a city math competition at 7, and was top of my class throughout elementary school. But it was never enough. Danielle, straighten your back. No one respects a girl who slouches at a cocktail party, my mother would hiss between clenched teeth during charity galas, still smiling at donors. Brandon, on the other hand, only needed to crack a dull joke to make everyone at the table laugh. She's too serious, my father once said, skimming past my straight-A report card to ask Brandon about his basketball game. I've lost count of how many times I was compared. Whenever I achieved something, my parents' reaction was always, "Good, but Brandon." When I won first place in a state essay contest at 12, a local newspaper asked to interview me. My mother booked hair appointments for the entire family. "They'll be taking a family photo. We need to present a unified image," she said, brushing my hair so hard I nearly cried. I remember the day the reporter came. The photo ended up with Brandon in the center, his arm over my shoulder like he was the winner. I stood off to the side in a lace dress my mother chose, smiling awkwardly and barely in the frame. "The article turned out great, sweetheart," my father said that evening. Brandon looked so polished. When I started thinking about college, my dream was to study law at Stanford, nearly 2,000 miles from New York. "Columbia's nearby and has tradition," my father said coldly. "Brandon went there too. You should seriously consider it." I still remember the day Stanford sent my acceptance letter, along with a partial scholarship. I rushed to share the news, hoping they'd finally smile. My mother glanced at it and nodded. "We'll cover the rest," but I waited for the rest of the sentence like waiting for a grenade to drop. "But the condition is that you come back and work for Moore and Kingsley after graduation." When I said no, the house went cold. From then on, everything I did was labeled against family values. Through all my childhood and youth, I don't recall a single moment where my parents praised me sincerely. Brandon, though. He was always the pride, the natural successor. I was the second child, there to fill the family portrait, as long as I stood in the right spot and smiled. What they didn't expect was that, in those years of being overlooked, I learned to stand on my own. I didn't need my parents to pave my way. I didn't need Brandon to step aside. And I certainly didn't need hollow praise from people who only saw me through the lens of the Moore name. I used to think I had to try harder for them to love me. But now I know validation can't be begged for. It has to come from those who truly see you. And my parents never did. To them, I was just part of the background, meant to support the perfect image they were so desperate to project. I left New York on a sweltering August morning, suitcase in hand and a job offer from Rosenfeld and Lang in Austin, Texas, tucked in my bag. It wasn't California, like I once dreamed of, but it was far enough to breathe, and close enough that they couldn't say I'd run away. When I told my parents about the decision during a weekend dinner, no one spoke for 30 full seconds. Then my father set his knife down and tapped his plate. "You're turning down Columbia?" His voice dropped, as if I'd just renounced my citizenship. "I'm turning down law school to avoid working for the family's real estate firm," I replied, trying to keep my tone level. My mother smiled, one of those perfectly rehearsed expressions shaped by decades of polite refusals at afternoon teas. "Danielle, who walks away from everything that's already been set in motion?" Everything that's been set in motion, I emphasized, was never for me. It's the life they want me to live, not the one I chose. Brandon was sipping red wine, raising an eyebrow but staying silent. As always, he never intervened, especially if it meant risking his standing with Dad. Do you think people in Austin will value you more than they do here? My father asked suddenly, voice quiet but cutting. Or do you just want to start over, as if the Moore name means nothing? I didn't respond. I'd spent months sitting with that question, and I knew the Moore name only had value if I played by their script. Otherwise, it became a weight. That flight to Texas was the first time freedom felt tangible. Not in a book or a teenage fantasy, but in a real place where I could rebuild myself from scratch. No expectations, no scrutinizing glances behind every word I said. The Rosenfels and Lang office sat in a glass tower overlooking the Colorado River. I remember stepping into the elevator on my first day and seeing my name printed on the employee badge, Danielle Moore, Junior Associate. Not Franklin's daughter, not Brandon's shadow, just me and my ability. I worked relentlessly. In the first 6 months, I handled 3 major cases and was personally invited by a managing partner to join the corporate contracts team. No one cared what brands I wore or how many shares my family owned. They only cared whether I could deliver. I rented a small apartment in South Congress, overlooking the train tracks and rows of old oak trees. For the first time in my life, I had bought furniture without asking my mother's opinion. I chose forest green curtains, even though I knew she'd call them oppressive and lacking refinement. I called home once a month, mostly to hear updates about Brandon sealing another resort deal in Maine or Dad considering a Scottsdale expansion. As for me, I was the girl in Texas they spoke of like a side project left on pause. By the time I was promoted to associate after just 1 year, a rare feat at the firm, I'd stopped updating them. The last time I called to share good news, my mother replied, "Brandon was just invited to a government investment summit. It's wonderful that you're both staying busy." That wonderful landed like a hollow pat on the back. I learned to love the life I chose. On weekends, I walked around Zilker Park, grabbed tacos at the farmer's market, and slowly built friendships with people who didn't care what my last name was, as long as I was kind. They never asked if I was coming back. They viewed Austin as a detour, a moment of youthful defiance, and I let them think that. Until one day, Brandon called. "Dad wants you to sign some documents," he said, voice flat. "Just some paperwork for a new real estate loan. Having your name on it will make the bank more comfortable." I went quiet. After all those years of cold distance, they only remembered me when they needed a signature. "I think I should review the agreement thoroughly before saying yes," I said, voice like ice. "Of course," Brandon replied, but I caught the hesitation in his tone. I hung up, set the phone down, and looked out the window at the sun spilling over the river. In that moment, I knew something larger was on its way, something that would force me to face not just them, but every wound I'd been trying to outrun. I met Julian at a community education workshop sponsored by my law firm in East Austin. He was the last one to walk in, shirt slightly wrinkled, arms full of papers. Nothing about him screamed remarkable. But when he began speaking about a career program for high school students, his voice steady, sincere, the whole room seemed to fall silent. Julian taught English at a public school and volunteered as a basketball coach on weekends. No MBA, no investment portfolio, no relatives listed on Forbes. But on our first dinner date at a small lakeside barbecue shack, I laughed more than I had in the past 3 months combined. We didn't fall in love like they do in movies. No lightning strikes, no orchestral background. Everything came slowly, but it came surely. After 6 months, Julian knew my morning coffee routine by heart, and I knew he played Coltrane whenever he felt stressed. He never asked about my father's work or tried to act impressed that I went to Stanford. With Julian, the only thing that mattered was whether I was happy, a question no one in my family had ever genuinely asked me. Last fall, Brandon invited me back to New York for our father's 70th birthday. Most of the family will be there. A few city officials, some partners. Mom and Dad want you to come. And bring someone if you'd like, he said over the phone. I hesitated, but Julian simply said, "If I'm part of your life, then I should see where you come from." We flew into New York on a sharp winter breeze. I wore a simple black dress. Julian borrowed a navy suit from a coworker. Definitely not bespoke, he joked as he tried it on. I squeezed his hand in the car, my heart tightening as we pulled up to the Moore estate, the same house that once stood like a wall between me and everything I wanted to become. The party was held in the second-floor ballroom, with a string quartet playing one of my mother's favorite classical pieces. The air was rich with red wine, smoked meats, and French perfume, like time hadn't moved at all inside these walls. My mother saw me first. "Danielle, you're here," she said, brushing a light hug on my shoulder before turning to Julian. "And this is—" "Julian Parker, pleasure to meet you," he said, offering a hand, polite but firm. She blinked. Just once, but long enough for me to notice her eyes scan his plain watch and unpolished shoes. "A teacher?" she asked lightly, nose tilted just a touch. "My daughter has such eclectic taste." I gripped Julian's hand. He smiled anyway, nodding. "I teach literature and debate at a local high school. It demands more than most people expect." "I'm sure it does," my father chimed in, whiskey in hand. "Education is the foundation, right? Even if the income's not exactly impressive." I froze. "Dad." Julian placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "It's okay." But I knew it wasn't. The whole night, my parents never asked him a single meaningful question. Instead, they paraded Brandon's new real estate ventures, Aspen's ski trip photos, and the names of influential guests in the room. When we stood to get dessert, my mother leaned in and whispered, "Danielle, you do realize this is a family event, not a PTA meeting." I stopped cold. Her words slapped harder than any raised voice. A few minutes later, Julian and I quietly left the party. In the cab ride back to the hotel, we said nothing. Not until we had changed into pajamas and were sitting by the window overlooking the city lights did I finally speak. They never actually see me, just the version they want me to be. Julian leaned back against the wall beside me. "Then let them stay blind. You don't live this life to perform for them." I laughed, my eyes stinging. "Aren't you embarrassed by how they treated you?" He shook his head. "No, I'm just sad that they don't realize how incredible you are." I took his hand, the city sparkled outside, and in that moment I knew I had lost another piece of my connection to my family. And I also knew I didn't regret it, because this time I chose me, and the man who truly saw me, not the Moore name. 2 months after that haunting birthday party, I had nearly cut off contact with my family. Not out of anger, but exhaustion. I'd grown too used to being judged, compared, and cast aside simply because I wouldn't follow the script they had written for me. But nothing could have prepared me for the icy betrayal they delivered that spring. That evening, I was at my office, finalizing a draft for a merger deal worth over $300 million. Julian brought me a late lunchbox, as he often did, and sat across from me reading while I edited. He always had a way of being present, quietly, but enough to make me feel safe. While waiting for the file to export, I scrolled through Instagram just to unwind, and in that moment, everything seemed to freeze. Cousin Laura, on my mother's side, had just posted a batch of outdoor photos captioned "More Family Weekend" and tagged at the lakefront villa in Montauk. I tapped her story. One image showed nearly the entire family. My parents, Brendan and his wife, aunts and uncles, even that cousin from San Diego I hadn't seen in 10 years. The caption underneath read, "Summer Family Summit is coming, just a little logistics warm-up." I stared at it over and over. No one had said a word to me. No text, no email, not even a hint. Julian, sitting across from me, noticed the shift in my face. "What happened?" I handed him the screen. He flipped through a few photos, then quietly set the phone down. They didn't mention any of this to you? I shook my head, bitterness climbing up my throat. I'm the only one who wasn't invited. 2 days later, Brandon called. I didn't answer. But that evening, while organizing files at home, my phone rang again. This time, it was my father. I picked up, voice flat. What is it, Dad? Danielle, he said. I assume you've seen the pictures online. Of course I saw them, I replied, eyes fixed on the wall. And of course I didn't get an invitation. He sighed, the kind of sigh people use when they've already rehearsed their excuse. This is an important occasion. The family is negotiating with some Korean investors. They are interested in expanding into luxury housing, and I need everything to be polished. Polished? I repeated. You know what I mean. You and Julian, your professions, your values, they don't quite align with the image Moore is trying to project. I paused, then let out a laugh, dry and unfamiliar even to me. So, I'm no longer part of the Moore image? Don't be overly sensitive, Danielle, he said, a trace of impatience creeping in. This is business. I need everything to match our standards. Standards, I said, each word slicing my throat, meaning white, wealthy, politically aligned, and absolutely no public school teachers in the group photo. Silence stretched for a beat. Then my father's voice returned, this time colder. If you can't align with the family's direction, it's best to keep some distance, at least for public events. I hung up without another word. One thought echoed in my mind. They've decided to cut me out of the game. That night, I didn't sleep. Julian made soup. I didn't eat. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a cup of hot tea and sat beside me as always. Around midnight, I opened my laptop, logged into my personal email, and searched for the loan agreement Brandon had asked me to co-sign last year, the one I had put aside out of loyalty to the family. I'd never read it carefully. But this time, I combed through every page, every clause. And when I reached the financial guarantor section, with my signature at the bottom, a chill crawled from the base of my spine to the back of my neck. It all made sense. They didn't need me in the family photo. They just needed me in the loan paperwork. And now that they had my signature, they no longer needed me to show up. I got the message at 6:40 a.m., just as I was adjusting the final slides for a presentation at the Morganfield Group headquarters, our company's biggest client to date. It was the closing day of a $1.7 billion merger I had pursued for nearly 8 months. Every figure lined up. Every clause was approved. I was about to make senior partner, at least 2 years ahead of schedule. The phone lit up. Sender, Dad. The message was a single line. You'd better not come to Montauk. Your mother and I have decided to cut ties. No greeting, no explanation, not even a pause for hesitation. I stood frozen in the empty conference room. The low hum of the AC filled the silence. The ceiling lights reflected off the polished wood floor, echoing the chill in those words. I stared at the screen. After a while, I typed just 2 words. No period, no exclamation mark, just 2 words as dry as every conversation we'd ever had. When I entered the main boardroom at 8 a.m., I smiled appropriately, spoke clearly, and delivered the presentation as if my heart hadn't just been ripped from my chest. Julian didn't call or text. I knew he was waiting until I was ready to touch the wound. I moved through that morning like a programmed shell, signing 3 contracts, nodding to the Morganfield chairman, and accepting congratulations from the executive board. Inside, I was empty. Not because I was shocked, but because I realized I didn't feel anything anymore. I'd gotten used to being excluded. But this time, they weren't hiding behind polite excuses. This time, they didn't mask their intent. They had truly erased me from the family. At noon, I returned to the office. Through the window on the 22nd floor, Austin buzzed below, lively and unaware that someone had just been disowned by her own parents via text. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out an old file, Moore and Kingsley Loan Agreement, Danielle Moore. I had agreed to sign it 3 years ago when Brandon convinced me the company just needed a strong signature to secure financing for their Houston Mall expansion. I hadn't asked too many questions because back then I still believed blood wasn't measured in credit scores. I called Hannah, my personal attorney, and said simply, I want to withdraw my name from that guarantor loan immediately. Hannah paused. Are you sure? The financial fallout for Moore and Kingsley could be significant. My family officially cut me off this morning, I said, steady. I see no reason to remain financially entangled. That afternoon, I signed the request to revoke my personal guarantee. I sent it myself to the bank with an official letter Hannah had prepared. Everything went out before 4 p.m. By 6:30, my phone began buzzing nonstop. First Brandon, I didn't pick up. Then a strange number. I assumed my father's secretary. Then my mother. Then Moore and Kingsley's financial assistant. By the time I sat on the balcony having dinner with Julian, my phone showed over 30 missed calls. Julian looked at me and silently offered another glass of wine. I won't check the messages, but if you need me to do anything, just say the word. I just smiled, light as air. I don't need anything. I'm doing the right thing. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. No jolts, no tears, no hoping someone would call and apologize, because I knew they wouldn't. And more importantly, I no longer needed them to. The next morning, I arrived at Hannah's office right on time, bringing a copy of the original loan agreement and a thick folder I had carefully compiled the night before. Walking into the law firm that morning felt very different from all the other times I'd represented clients. This time, I was the one behind the signature to be removed, not because I lost a case, but because I refused to be used any longer. Hannah was already waiting. She pulled out a chair for me, placed a warm cup of tea on the table, and opened her laptop. We'll begin by sending an official notice to the guarantor bank, Texas National Trust, she said. Per the agreement, withdrawing the guarantee will trigger a clause that requires your father's company to provide a replacement asset within 30 days. And if they can't? I asked. Hannah looked up and met my eyes. The entire $1.5 million loan could be recalled early. The preferential interest rate would be void. They'd have to refinance under harsher terms or sell assets. I nodded. Good, send it. Hannah exhaled, hesitating slightly. You know, this will cause a very strong reaction. I hope it does, I replied. Let them see I'm no longer the one who stays silent and nods along. 2 hours later, I received an email from the bank confirming that the request had been received and was being processed. Within 24 hours, Moore and Kingsley would officially receive a notice requiring them to provide a replacement guarantee or pay off the loan immediately. I walked out of Hannah's office like a weight had finally been lifted from my chest after 3 long years. A strange kind of freedom, not flashy, but so real that I had to stop mid-street, tilt my head up, and smile at the sky. At 4 p.m. that day, my phone rang. This time, I picked up. Brendan's voice came through, tense but trying to stay calm. Danielle, what's going on? You just pulled your guarantee from the Houston loan. Yes, I said, offering no further explanation. Do you know what that means? He gritted his teeth. The bank's asking us to post new collateral within 30 days. And right now, all assets are tied up in the Florida project. I know. No need to repeat the terms I clearly read in the agreement I signed, I said, keeping my voice steady. A long pause. Dad's furious, Brandon said. He said if we can't resolve this by the end of the week, we'll have to terminate contracts with 3 strategic investors. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. If he wants to speak with me, he should call directly, not use someone else as a middleman. Didn't think you'd actually go through with it, Brandon muttered, like I was a child who'd acted out. I smiled, for the first time in days. That was his first mistake, I said, and it'll be his last. That evening, I received 5 more calls from unknown numbers, an email from Moore and Kingsley's legal department, a short text from my mother. Your father is very disappointed. You can still fix this. I didn't reply. I was at Julian's house, sitting in the kitchen, watching him season a pot of butternut squash soup. He didn't ask what had happened. He simply poured me a glass of white wine and placed a hand gently on my shoulder. Today, you took a really big step, he said softly. I looked at him, the only person who never needed me to prove anything to deserve love. I took a sip of wine. The warmth spread from my throat, all the way down to my soul. 3 days after I withdrew my guarantee from the Houston loan, Brandon flew straight to Austin. No notice, no call. He showed up at my office around noon on a Monday, accompanied by a man in his 50s with a guarded expression and a leather portfolio. My assistant, Kelsey, knocked urgently on my door and whispered, "Danielle, your brother is in the lobby. Says it's urgent, private." I hesitated for a few seconds, then nodded. "Take them to the conference room on the 8th floor. I'll be down in 10 minutes. When I walked into the room, Brandon stood up immediately, his gray suit still marked by the flight. The man with him introduced himself as Raymond Hess, an interim financial supervisor recently hired by Moore and Kingsley to handle the liquidity crisis following my withdrawal. I sat down calmly across from them. "I have 30 minutes. Brandon placed the portfolio on the table, opened it, and pulled out 2 file folders marked with orange sticky notes. "Danielle," he said, his voice lower, trying to stay calm, "you need to look at this." I looked down. On the table were 2 loan agreements from 2021, one for equipment financing at the Nashville branch, another for working capital on the Florida project. The signature on both? Danielle Moore. I stared at the signatures. Uncannily similar, but still off. The D lacked the loop I always added, and the dot on the I was slightly off to the left. I slowly looked up. "I never signed these documents." Brandon nodded. "I know. And who do you think did?" We checked the signing dates. Both documents were submitted during the time you were handling the class action case in Dallas. Your work location and travel calendar don't match. Raymond interjected, his voice soft but sharp. "We hired a handwriting expert. Preliminary analysis shows the signatures were likely simulated, not written by you." A tense silence stretched between the 3 of us. I looked at Brandon. Not angry, not cold, just one clear emotion left: remorse. "It was Dad, wasn't it?" I asked, nearly whispering. "He forged my signature." Brandon said nothing, just gave a slow nod. He thought, since it was just an internal guarantee, it wasn't worth bothering you. The company was under pressure. He panicked, took a risk. I leaned back in my chair. My heart wasn't racing, just aching, a deep kind of pain, familiar, like someone reopening an old scar I thought had healed. "How long have you known?" I asked. "Just last week," Brandon replied, meeting my eyes. "When the bank sent an update on the loan, I was confused why you hadn't responded. When I checked the old documents, I got suspicious. And when I asked, Dad didn't deny it." I let out a bitter laugh. "And Mom? She doesn't know yet." I nodded. "Good. Because I'll be the one to tell her." Raymond closed the folder and gently pushed it toward me. "We're not looking for legal confrontation. If you agree not to pursue legal action, the company will take full responsibility and immediately void all documents listing you as a guarantor." I didn't respond right away. I picked up the fake signature, examining each forged line. This wasn't just a legal deception. It was a living proof of betrayal that had lasted 36 years, written in black and white. I said slowly, "I'll have my attorney review everything carefully. I'm not promising anything." Brandon nodded. As he got up to leave, he paused. "Danielle, I'm sorry. I should have protected you long ago." I looked at him for a long moment, and even if I wasn't ready to forgive, I didn't push him away. "Every path starts somewhere," I said. "Let's hope this time you're choosing the right one." After they left the room, I sat alone with the folder in my hands. My father had forged my signature, and this time he would have to face the truth. No more charades to shield him. 3 weeks after the meeting with Brandon and Raymond, I received an email from the law firm's board of directors. The subject was brief: official nomination partnership track. I opened it in silence. No laughing, no screaming, no tears, just a long exhale. Inside, it felt like everything finally clicked into place. Every night working until 3 a.m., every weekend negotiation, every time I set aside personal disappointment to protect a client's interest was finally seen. On merit, without backing, without the more name. That afternoon, I left early. Julian had invited me to dinner at a small lakeside restaurant we visited during our first month of dating. I thought he just wanted to celebrate my good news, but when dessert was brought out, instead of the usual chocolate mousse, the server placed a small velvet box on the table. Julian stood up. He didn't say cliches like, "From the moment I met you," or "You're my whole world." He just looked at me with such seriousness and sincerity, I had to swallow hard to keep my hands from shaking. "Danielle Moore," he said softly, "you've spent your life fighting to be recognized. But to me, you were always enough. Since day one. You can keep building your world, your way. I'm only asking for one thing: to walk beside you for the rest of it." I didn't answer right away. My throat was tight, because for the first time in my life, I didn't have to measure my worth to earn love. I nodded, and when he slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt something I'd never touched in all 36 years. Peace. I didn't make our engagement public, but somehow my mother found out. She sent flowers to my office, a bouquet of white tulips with a small card. "If you want, I would love to be there for your big day. No pressure, just Mom, Linda." I held the card, sitting by the window, watching the spring wind move the trees across the street. I knew she had nothing to do with the financial misconduct. I knew most of her life was spent behind a facade my father built. But I also knew forgiveness doesn't mean opening the door again. I texted her, "I'm rebuilding everything from the ground up, including boundaries. If you want to walk with me, the first condition is honesty." She replied 10 minutes later, "I understand. And I'm relearning that slowly but truly." Brandon kept his word. He sent all documents related to the forged contracts to my attorney. We reached a settlement out of court. Moore and Kingsley would compensate for legal and financial damages, remove my name from all current and future obligations, and agreed I had the right to go public if I chose. I chose not to, not out of fear, but because I no longer needed to prove anything. My father never called, never emailed, not a single apology. But I wasn't waiting anymore. One Friday afternoon, as Julian and I were scouting wedding venues, I came across a local business report. Moore and Kingsley had just withdrawn from 2 major projects due to cash flow issues and the loss of a strategic partner. I read it, then closed my laptop. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vindicated, just like a door had finally shut for good. Our wedding took place 6 months later, on the shores of Lake Travis, under the golden glow of sunset. No guest lists of elites, no crystal centerpieces or 8-tier cake, just close friends, colleagues I respected, and family. By a new definition, my mother came wearing a soft jade green dress that didn't stand out. She sat in the 3rd row, didn't give a speech, didn't try to steal the spotlight. After the ceremony, as I stepped down the stone path, she came up and hugged me. "You've lived exactly how you wanted, and I'm proud, even if I didn't always say it." I held her hand, saying nothing. Some wounds don't need stitching, just the space to stop bleeding. That night, as fireworks lit up the lake, Julian pulled me close. "I've never seen you shine like this," he whispered. I looked at the reflections in his eyes and softly replied, "Because for the first time in my life, I don't have to ask permission to be myself." Danielle's story proves that being born into wealth doesn't guarantee real love. When acceptance is conditional, based on image, power, and expectations, the only way forward is to validate yourself. She chose to walk away from the gilded cage and build a life on her own terms. And in doing so, she found freedom, not in her family's forgiveness, but in fully loving herself without needing anyone's permission. What do you think of Danielle's decision? Would you have the courage to do the same in her place? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful and inspiring family stories.